That tastes good. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm gonna be talking in this mic in this video. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that when I edit this video, this microphone might not actually work, so excuse the audio if it's bad. Okay? Okay. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Thank you all so much for 1K subscribers. I couldn't believe it when I actually saw it. Thank you to everyone who subscribed. And as a huge thank you, I cannot give you things in the thousands, but I can give you an awesome story time. Okay. If you clicked on this video, the title will surprise you because it's true. It's a true story. On my channel, and just like in person, I love to just be super positive and just focus on my most positive experiences in life. And you know, that's the way I keep sane, that's the way I keep normal, that's the way I just vibe and I just move. So I never really focus on like the negative things or things that bring me down a lot, but sometimes I think back to my life and think of how crazy some things have been that I've experienced. Like I just look back and I'm like, okay, there's some crazy things that have happened for sure, and we're just not gonna address that. No? Okay. Early 2019. I was 16 at this time. So the story actually started when I started my education here in the Netherlands. Before I went to a Dutch high school, which incidentally is my first ever video on my channel that kind of blew up a little bit. Thank you for everyone who watched that. I still get messages about that till this day, and I still get comments on that. Before I went to this institution that I put the video up, I went to a Dutch learning school, which within my previous videos I've mentioned before. The thing is, I've always described coming out of the school and learning Dutch, but I've never really described my experience there. And to be honest, the majority of my experience was good. Like this is not like oh, this institution is bad. No, I still have a lot of teachers that I speak to, that speak to me, that still support me on social media, that have seen my growth and are super proud of me. And I'm just super grateful that I had them as teachers and mentors. A lot of them helped me furthering in my education here in the Netherlands. So it's not like a institution is bad and we need to burn them down. No, it was just one person who really decided to be out of pocket. Within this institution, I don't want to say the name. I just don't feel like that's necessary. And also this person I'm talking about does no longer work there, so that's also a good thing. In this institution, what would normally happen is that you would be there for a certain amount of time, so you're only there to learn Dutch and Dutch only. It's not like a normal high school. Like basically we used to have geography, for example, and it wouldn't be geography on necessarily a specific level for everyone, but you would get basic level books in geography and you would have to read in Dutch and basically just keep up. The tests weren't necessarily hard. The whole point of it was to test how good your Dutch was and whether you could continue and follow along with the subject as it was being taught. If your Dutch was better than per usual, then you would be given books attained to a certain level. So in each class you can find some people who are reading KGT books, which are like basically basic elementary books, and you would get people who are reading books that are much more advanced than that, on HAVO niveau, on secondary level or something. So that's kind of the setup of what we were working in. And basically this teacher, we're gonna call her Mrs. T because I don't want to mention her real name. I don't think she really deserves that on this channel. We're gonna call her Mrs. T because this woman was definitely in her mid 50s. Let's say early 50s. Like, I'm not gonna give her the grace of being in her 40s. And that's not to age shame, you know, that's not really what that is. It's just like she was definitely an older woman. And Mrs. T was a teacher who actually just gave me Dutch as a subject, like Nederlands as a subject. Like that was, you come into her class and you would focus on just Nederlands or Dutch on itself. In her classroom, like they would give us basic elementary school books that would focus on grammar and vocab, and basically we would be rewriting sentences that we would in English or just normal speaking sentences, and we would rewrite them in Dutch. At this time, I was still very new to this school. I just started in November 2018, and if you would come into her class, you were still basic elementary Dutch. So our books were very much like, oh, Ik ben Deborah. Ik woon hier in deze stad. Things like that, basically. In this classroom and in this whole entire institution, because you have people trying to learn Dutch, this whole entire institution was just filled of people of color and of different cultures. Like in my class, I remember I had 3 people from Iran, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Portugal, Eritrea, from different cities, basically. Like different people, like there was so much diversity in one class. All of my other classes were perfectly fine. Like I never had a problem within these classes. And me as a student, I don't want to give myself, like, I don't want to look back on this with rose-colored glasses. But as a student, like, I never had any problems with any teacher. I've never been, like, a disobedient student. I've always been really good at academia. Like, I've never really slacked. Like, that's just never been my thing, basically. I was really focused in learning Dutch as soon as possible, so I really went hard in the school. Like, I would study Dutch day and night. I would go to the teachers and be like, what else can you give me? Like, what else can I do? Can I do exam questions? What is expected of me? How do I get to this level? Like, how do I progress? How do I get out of here quicker? Because the whole point is you're not supposed to be there for long. You're supposed to be there for a shorter amount of time. That was who I was. I was very unbothered with everything else around me. I was just like, well, I'm here to do my stuff and get out. I don't care. I don't care about anyone else right now. I'm trying to get as much into my brain and get the fuck out. Like that was the vibe, basically. In Mrs. T's class, I was exactly the same. We would have daily tasks and we would come in. And she was not a naturally very loved teacher at all, really. Her classes were kind of the classes that we used to dread the most because of not necessarily what she was teaching us, but how she was. She was a little condescending sometimes. Like, we would notice it, but all of us, like, wouldn't say anything because I guess there's that, she's our teacher, we just have to be respectful. Some kids would, give her a hard time, but for me, it was more like, why should I be bothered with a teacher right now when my focus is to get my education, get my certificate, and get the hell out of here? Like, why am I so focused on, I don't care. Do you know what I mean? Let me just get by in this class so I can leave. Like, I have no beef with you. That's how I was. Like, I genuinely, like, I don't care. If you're having an attitude this morning and you decide to shout at all of us, that's your fucking problem. I want my books marked, and I want my grade, and I want out. That was the vibe with me and her. So she wasn't a very kind person to begin with. She was always super condescending. Like, it'd be little things. I had a person who had moved from China here, and he was a good friend of mine in this school, and he could never really pronounce, like, R's or certain letters because they're obviously different in Mandarin than they are in English, and she really used to give him a hard time for that. Like, she would force us to sit in front of a board and pronounce words, and say, like, she would write down the day. Today is February the 10th or something, and she would be like, vandaag is Februari 10, or something like that. Like, vandaag is 10 Februari or something like that, and then she would write down these sentences on the board, and we each individually had to say them out loud. And I remember, like, this guy friend, we're gonna call him M. We're gonna call him M, because he's not really extremely relevant, but just so you can see what I mean. And I remember we would sit down and almost for 20 minutes within our 2-hour lesson be focused on the fact that he couldn't pronounce some of the letters. And she used to make him feel a little bit ashamed about that. Like, it's not something that he could help. He was also 16. He'd also just migrated from a different country. And she would make him sit there until he pronounced it as well as she wanted him to pronounce it. Instead of just being like, hey, okay, this is different. This is how it's pronounced. She would be like, do it again. Do it again. Do it again. In front of everyone. And we would all just sit there in uncomfortable silence because he was really trying his best. And you could see that. Now, you could argue, that's a law student in me, but you could argue that she was just, fine-tuning her method, and, I guess, but it was just always super uncomfortable, and I always felt super bad. He always used to feel super insecure about the way he pronounced things, and he always used to dread doing that again. But he was also determined, and he came back stronger, so I guess, kudos to M. If you see this, I hope you're doing well. If we had homework, I'd always finish it and I'd do extra, like just so she could be out of my hair so I wouldn't be picked on, you know? She never really made the environment feel safe. But again, like my brain was just kind of ignoring that. Like my brain was like, I'm not here to feel safe. I'm here to get my grades and go. The day comes. The day comes, it finally happens. I've been hearing a lot of rumors about her, like, and how she had been mistreating students. I didn't really want to involve myself in anything. I said, drama-free 2019, bro. Like, I could not care less. My brain was very much like, okay, that's not happening to me. And I know that's a kind of one-sided way to see things, but my brain was kind of like, okay, this isn't really like my place, so I'm not gonna get involved in these things have happened like way before I came here. So like it was just me just being like, okay, that's not gonna stop me from going hard. Like I'm not gonna become a hater all because I've heard some things. But yeah, definitely the vibe was originally off. We had gotten homework and it was this yellow book pamphlet about going to school. And it was an elementary school book, and it had lines on the inside, and it would be practicing your basic Dutch sentences. Like, it would be like, oh, we gaan naar school. Ik heb een potlood. It was relatively easy for me to do. I'd finished it. And when we come into the classroom, we also had new books to continue because we were in continuous practice. After you had finished each individual workbook, including the homework that you did. So if you didn't do the homework, you would do the homework in class. And then afterwards, you would do the class given work that you were supposed to do, right? And so after doing that, I close my book, and what happens is after you finish the work, first of all, the homework and the class objective work that you're given, you would go to her desk in front of the class next to the whiteboard, and you would sit next to her, and she would grade your book while you were sitting next to her, standard stuff. And if there have been any mistakes or anything you've gotten wrong, you're normally supposed to discuss it and be like, okay, do this better, or this is the right sentence and this is why you got this wrong. Fine. So she does this for each person individually, and she marks their paper, marks their little booklet, and, you know, we'll say, okay, this was wrong, this was right, great, move on, next. Nobody in this, like, line of students coming up to her desk got any comments. No one. Absolutely no one. No one did. And she calls me up, and so I go sit on the chair next to her, and I'm like, okay, this is what I did for my homework, and this is the class objective work. Right? So I sit next to her, and she's marking my paper, and the majority of it is good. I get a few occasionally wrong, or she suggests that I could change some things, and I'm like, fair, that's valid. You know, I'm not an expert in the language, that's why I'm here to learn. So I'm like, yeah, okay, that's great. Yes, I did this, I did this, I did this. And so at one point when I'm sitting on the chair like this, right? And she's next to me, and at one point I put my hand on the table while she is like marking my paper. So she's marking my paper, I put my hand on the edge of the table like this, my knuckle, involuntary movement. Like it's not like it's I don't know what to call it. Not involuntary movement. It's like it's nothing special. I just put my hand on the table. And at some point while she's like grading the paper and it's going well, she stops while she finishes the paper, and she's like, okay, that's great, it's well done. I'm like, cool, awesome, please give me back my book. My brain is like, okay, I'm gonna go to the next booklet now. I'm going back to my desk. And she stops, and while my hand is still on the table, and she looks at my hand, and she's like, waarom ben je zo donker? Which means, why are you so dark? And instantly, my brain is like, did I hear that correctly, or did I not hear that correctly? In fact, I think my brain just went into denial mode, because I was like, did I hear that sentence correctly? Like, maybe my Dutch isn't as good as I thought it was, because no, I heard. Instantly, my brain went into like, my face started to feel hot. Brain was like, huh? Like, okay, maybe I heard that wrong. And she continues. She doesn't stop. And she's like, she brings out her hand. And she compares my hand with hers, and she, takes her pen and she's like, oh, je bent zo donker. Waarom ben je zo donker? Kijk, je bent zo donker, which basically means you're so dark. Why are you so dark? In a comparison to her skin on the table. Again, my brain is not processing this. And for once in my life, because I'm a talkative person, for once in my life, I'm speechless because I don't know what is going on. Like, and she just continues saying that. And my brain is like, for one split second, this is how I know I wasn't processing the information. I actually tried to explain. I tried to explain why I was so dark in comparison to her. Like, my brain actually was like, oh, because, like, I'm African born? Like, because my ancestors or my parents or like, my brain actually tried to explain to a 50-year-old woman, 50-year-old plus woman, why my skin was so dark. I was literally here trying to give her a geography lesson. Like, I was like, oh, like, I'm African, as if there was not another Black person in this room and there were not other people of color who had varying shades of skin tones in this room. I actually, because I was 16 and I was so dumbfounded that I actually tried to explain why I'm Black, why I'm dark skinned. It's crazy. And it's not funny, actually, because I'm laughing as like a coping mechanism, but like, what? And so I actually try and explain to her. And then at one point my brain is like, what are we explaining? She's a 50-year-old something woman. And she continues. And then I'm like, well, and then she's like, yeah, okay, thank you. She gives me back my booklet and she tells me to go and sit down at my desk. And while I'm still processing what just happened, everyone in front of me, like if I was sitting at this same table in front of me, looked up and they looked at me in the eyes like this. And I looked back at them in the eyes like this, and everyone was speechless. And I knew in that moment, okay, something was wrong. Because again, in my brain, in my young, naive brain, I just couldn't believe that this is what we'd be doing in the 21st century. But sure, like and one of the girls I used to hang out with looked at me and she looked at the teacher and she had this face of like, did that actually just happen? Like, Deborah, did you actually just process what happened? And I didn't process it fully in that moment. I didn't. After the class, because the bell rang like 2 minutes after this incident happened, after the class, the girl comes to me and she's like, girl bestie, what just happened? And I'm like, girl bestie, I'm too shook to say anything. Like, I don't even know if that was real. Like, some point of my brain actually felt like this wasn't happening and I was dreaming, but I wasn't. Because the whole entire class had witnessed it. And she had said it in front of the whole entire class loudly. It wasn't like a secret conversation. It wasn't like a whisper. She said it in front of the class. Like, oh, why are you so dark? Huh? Everybody in the class was also just kind of so taken aback. And so as we leave the classroom, my brain, I can't stop thinking about it during the pausa, during the break. Pausa is break. And I go downstairs to the cafeteria and I'm like, my brain is really just like, it does not believe that just happened. Like, it does not want to believe that just happened to me. So I sit with my friends at lunch and I'm friends with these two twins at the time. If you guys are still subscribed to the channel, hey y'all, what's up? Y'all remember this? And so they asked me like, hey, how was the third period? And I was like, yeah, like it was fine. Hey, Mrs. T just said this to me. And she just asked me that. Like, instantly, they both look at me like, what? What did she say? And I was like, yeah, like Mrs. T just asked me why I was so dark. And even they were so dumbfounded that they looked at me and they were like, huh? And I was like, yeah, like it actually just happened. It just happened right now. And so the twins asked me, like, so what did you say? And I was like, nothing, because I couldn't even believe that it happened. I didn't even know. What do you say? What do you say in these kind of situations? How do you go about this? How do you, am I supposed to explain to this woman? Am I supposed to like educate her? Is that my job? That's not my job. My job is to be a student. My job is to come into school and not be asked about why my skin is so dark. Like, I've been here for, I'm not the only person of color in this institution. You know, like, we have other people from other race. Like, the girl out of the twins is like, you should say something. Like, you should, that is racist. Like, you can't, like, you can't just get away with that. Like, she can't just be saying things like that. And she also, like, she was like, you have to say something. And I was like, what do I say? The break ends because it was 15 minutes. And I go back to this room, and part of my brain was like, am I really just gonna go back to this classroom and pretend like nothing just happened? And I'm just gonna sit down, and she's just gonna possibly say the same thing to me again when I sit down next to her, when I just want my books graded, when I didn't even have a conversation about skin tones with this woman. Are we just gonna pretend like this didn't happen? And instantly, that's when my body like fully recognized, oh wow, she really did say that. Wow. So when I went back to the classroom and I stepped through the door, my body was like, no, we're not gonna pretend that didn't happen. She tells me to go inside, and I'm like, you know what? No. No, I can't do that. I tell her my Dutch at this time was not necessarily the best when it came to speaking, so I couldn't create like comprehensive sentences about emotional things, especially being emotional, because I started crying. I looked at her and I said it in English, which we weren't supposed to do because we were supposed to be speaking Dutch, but I said it in English. And I said, I cannot sit in this classroom. I told her in front of the whole entire class, and I was like, what you have said to me is the most disrespectful thing I think I've ever heard, and I'm disappointed. And the fact that you are a teacher and this is the kind of treatment I get. I came to you so I could get my books graded. And instead, I leave with a weird comment about my skin. And as I'm like giving this monumental speech, because I don't know what else to do, and I'm just being extremely honest about my feelings, she's like, oh, no. And she starts like freaking out because I'm crying. She's like, no, come sit down, like, come sit down with me, because her English wasn't great, but she understood what I was saying. And she was like, no, I was just pointing out, you know, how different our skin tones were and how like different the hue of your skin tone is from mine. Why did you only say that with me? Like, why? She sits me down to a table, and then to top this whole story off, she offers me a half-eaten Rolo from her desk, because she used to eat Rolos at the time. Yeah, she used to eat Rolos when we were in class. She offers me a piece of a half-eaten bar of Rolos, so one of the Rolos, and she's like, here, have a sweet. Have a sweet. I'm sorry. Are you offering me a piece of Rolo? She's like, yeah, just have a seat. Go sit down. We'll continue the lesson, okay? And I'm like, this girl is crazy. And with that, she expected me to just take the Rolo as compensation to keep me shut, because apparently what I needed was a Rolo. She expected me to go sit down, and I was like, no. I literally looked at her and I was like, no, I'm sorry, and I don't want your sweet. I don't, like, I never asked for this. Mind you, this is happening in front of the whole entire classroom. Like, the whole entire classroom is witnessing part 2 of this. So I leave. I didn't tell anyone that day, but when I went home, I told my mom and my dad, and I was like, hey, this teacher said this to me, and it was weird. And my parents instantly were like, what? And I was like, yeah. And it happened in front of the whole entire classroom. by the way. My mother was livid. She calls the principal the next morning. She gets everyone involved because like I'm in another class. I didn't have her for a class the next day. The principal calls somebody else to call me into the principal office. And she's like, hey, this just happened. Your mother just called us. Is this true? And I was like, yeah, this is true. Everybody was a witness to this. There was like 15 other people who saw this happening and heard this whole entire conversation. It was not a secret. And so we were sitting down at the principal's office and she's like, okay, we need to do something about this. How are you feeling? Are you okay? And again, even with all of this, my brain still isn't like, it still didn't feel real. It still felt so unreal that this was happening. I get a few teachers who talk to me and they're like, hey, like we heard what happened. Are you okay? Can you please tell us what happened? We're also going to ask the rest of the classroom. They ask the rest of the classroom and the resolution is the principal sets up a meeting with me, the principal, and Mrs. T. Yeah. And she makes me sit down with Mrs. T over here, and we're supposed to have a conversation about this. And I'm asked in English this time around, like, what happened? And so I tell my full story in this room, and I'm like, okay, this happened to me. And Mrs. T, you know, she's a gaslight girl boss gatekeep. She really said, no, like, that's not what I meant at all. Like, I was just so aware of her skin tone. Like she just put her hand on the desk and I was just like, oh wow, you know, like look at her. She's so dark. Like she just keeps on emphasizing how dark I am and in comparison to her. And when she says it, it doesn't sound any better. It just feels like gaslighting. Like it doesn't sound any better where she tries to explain her reasoning. Even the principal's like, girl, you did not. After this, you know, she apologizes, but she gives an apology of like, oh, I'm so sorry you were offended. Like she gives that kind of apology. And she's like, yeah, like, I'm so sorry that like, if you thought that I was offensive or if I was trying to offend you. I was just kind of there, like still trying to process everything. And I was like, yeah, sure. Because at this time I was like, what else can you do? What can you ask somebody for? You can't force somebody to realize something. So what else can you do? Like, I was just kind of like, okay, sure. I just wanted the whole situation to be over, to be honest. I was just kind of over like this and sitting there with her and being told that I took it wrong and that that's not what she meant, you know? I understand ignorance. I've seen some ignorant people make some ignorant comments, but there's a difference between just genuinely not knowing, being painfully unaware of something and not being educated in that. And then there's another thing between that and just willfully being ignorant. Like you can't tell me that was without some form of intent, because what were you trying to achieve? What did you expect me to be like? Yeah, like I am so dark. Oh my gosh, wow. Like, look at us. Like, what did you expect from me? What did you expect to happen? We weren't having a conversation about our skin tone. I didn't ask you about that. I asked you to mark my paper as you did for everybody else without a comment. Make it make sense, you know? Safe to say, I did not attend her classes after that. I didn't have to either. I was not only the only person that she made rude or sensitive comments about. She also used to call some other kids fat to their faces. She used to bully some other kids. Like, she was a messy girl, Mrs. T. But yeah, Mrs. T, if you're watching this, I made it out of your class. I made it out of your school. And my skin is beautiful. It is dark. It is beautiful. It is absolutely lovely. My skin has just never been like something I've been like, oh, I'm so insecure about. No. Babes, I look good. I look good with the skin tone, and that's on period. I love my skin tone, and it doesn't matter who is going to be ignorant about it. Babes, I'm still here. I'm still looking good. I'm still wearing amazing colors. I'm still wearing amazing colors that you can't. Make it make sense. Not me being messy, but it's true. Like, Miss Girl. I don't know whether she was fired officially or whether she resigned. All I know is that Miss Girl did not work there when I saw her, when I went to go visit the school. She was out. She was a goners. and she had hurt more children, verbally at least, from what I've heard, on a much more bigger scale than just with me. I was just the tipping point. I was just the one who complained. This is not the first time and won't be the last time that somebody would come for you as a Black woman for your skin, or just as a person of color, to be honest. Like, I don't know why we're experiencing this, but it happens. All I want everyone to know who's watching, your skin is beautiful, babes. Do not let one raggedy ass person tell you otherwise. And for anyone who's going through the situation, whether it's colorism, whether it's like anything crazy like that, it's just pure discrimination, babes. You are not changing yourself for anybody's raggedy ass tail out here. Not in these 2023 streets. No, ma'am. You're absolutely beautiful, and do not let any person tell you otherwise. Like, generally, I hear that a lot, but your skin, the way you were born, the way you were wonderfully and fearfully made, should not be doubted by anybody. I don't care who they think they are. So, and that's all motherfucking period. Thank you so much to everyone who's watching this video. If you guys would like another story time, please let me know, because I have a whole lot of crap that has happened to me in the past 5 years. Like, I have gone through it. And yeah, you guys can check out all my links. I'm still making music. I still have my little earring thing going on. So you can check out my Etsy store. Like, I'm still here. I'm still trying to get my bag, you know? But also, I'm still smiling and I'm still happy. So yeah. Also, if you made it this far, please like, share, and subscribe. Like, just subscribe. Please subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next one. Okay? Bye!